He thought he was doing the right thing by staying silent until the secret started ruining his life. This is what he finally admitted on Reddit. Welcome back to Internet Court. Here we have the case of a man who learned some hard lessons about remaining silent. For years, Mark believed that keeping the peace was the same as doing the right thing. He wasn't a confrontational person, never had been. He was the type who avoided arguments, smoothed things over, and convinced himself that silence was a form of kindness. And for a long time, that mindset seemed to work, at least on the surface. But the truth he eventually posted to _GetItOffMyChest made one thing painfully clear. Silence has a cost. Mark was 34, married, and outwardly stable. He had a decent job, a small house in the suburbs, and a routine that looked fine to anyone on the outside. He and his wife, Lena, had been together for nearly 8 years, married for 5. They weren't wildly romantic, but they were comfortable, predictable, calm. And that calm mattered to Mark more than he liked to admit. Growing up in a loud, chaotic household had taught him one lesson early. Conflict always made things worse. Arguments escalated. Feelings got hurt. Nothing ever really got resolved. So when Mark and Lena started having issues early in their marriage, small things at first, he did what he always did. He swallowed them. At first it felt manageable, even noble. He told himself relationships required compromise, that nobody got everything they wanted, and that being easygoing was a strength. But over time, the compromises became one-sided, and the silence became heavier. It started with little moments that left Mark uneasy. Lena would make decisions without him, financial ones, social ones, and then act surprised when he seemed uncomfortable. She dismissed his concerns with jokes or quick reassurances. "You worry too much," she'd say. "It's not a big deal. You always overthink." Each time, Mark considered pushing back. Each time, he didn't. Internally, he told himself it wasn't worth the argument, that bringing it up would just create tension, that harmony mattered more than being right. But harmony built on silence isn't real harmony. And slowly, Mark began to feel like a guest in his own life. The turning point came 2 years into the marriage, though Mark didn't realize it at the time. He discovered something that deeply unsettled him. Not a dramatic betrayal, not a single explosive event, just a pattern that made his stomach drop once he noticed it. Lena had been lying. Not about one thing, about many small things. Who she'd spoken to, where she'd been, how money was being spent. Conversations she insisted never happened. When Mark gently questioned her, she denied everything. Calmly, confidently, as if his memory was the problem. And instead of trusting his instincts, Mark doubted himself. He told himself he was imagining things, that he was being paranoid, that confronting her without proof would only make him look unreasonable. So once again, he said nothing. But this time, the silence started to eat at him. Over the next year, Mark changed, quietly. He became anxious, distracted, restless. He replayed conversations in his head, second-guessed his own recollections, and started keeping mental notes of things that didn't line up. He hated that version of himself. He didn't want to be suspicious. He didn't want to feel like he was building a case against his own wife. And yet, the unease never went away. At night, lying beside her, he would stare at the ceiling and wonder how 2 people could share a life while living in completely different realities. He thought about speaking up constantly. Tomorrow, he'd tell himself. Next week, after things calmed down. But things never calmed down. They just grew quieter, and quieter still. The breaking point didn't come during a fight. It came during a completely ordinary evening. Mark overheard Lena casually contradict something she'd told him months earlier. Something important. something that affected both of them. When he gently pointed it out, she laughed and said he was remembering it wrong. Again. That night, something shifted. Mark realized this wasn't about one lie or even many lies. It was about erasure, his thoughts, his perceptions, his voice. And in that moment, he understood something terrifying. By staying silent, he had trained himself not to trust his own reality. That realization followed him for weeks, until he finally did the one thing he'd avoided for years. He wrote everything down. Posting to Reddit wasn't about advice. Mark made that clear. He wasn't asking if he was right or wrong. He wasn't looking for validation. He just needed to say it, all of it, out loud. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in within hours. Some were compassionate. They told him he wasn't weak, just conflict avoidant. That many people are taught to equate silence with maturity. That recognizing the pattern was already a step forward. Others were far less gentle. They accused him of enabling the behavior, of abandoning himself, of choosing comfort over honesty and then resenting the consequences. One comment hit particularly hard. You didn't keep the peace. You sacrificed yourself and called it peace. Another said, you don't avoid conflict, you postpone it, and it always comes back bigger. But not everyone blamed him. Some commenters turned their focus to Lena, pointing out the gaslighting, the dismissal, the pattern of minimizing his concerns. Others argued that the truth was more complicated, that silence and manipulation can feed off each other until neither person knows how it started. Reddit, as always, was divided. As the comments piled up, Mark faced a question he'd avoided for years. Was he willing to finally speak, even if it cost him the marriage? Or would he stay quiet and accept that this was the life he'd chosen? For days, he didn't respond, and Reddit waited. A week later, Mark posted an update. He said he'd finally talked to Lena, not explosively, not dramatically, but honestly, for the first time. He told her how long he'd felt invisible, how deeply the dismissals had affected him, how close he was to losing himself entirely. Her reaction wasn't what he'd hoped. She didn't explode, but she didn't really listen either. She apologized, vaguely, said she never meant it that way, suggested therapy, but only if it was framed as a communication issue, not a trust issue. And in that moment, Mark understood something else. Sometimes speaking up doesn't fix the problem. Sometimes it simply reveals it. They didn't separate immediately. But something had changed. For the first time, Mark wasn't silent. And for the first time, he was prepared for whatever that honesty might cost. Mark didn't post to Reddit because he wanted a verdict. He posted because silence had finally become heavier than the truth. And whether his marriage survived or not, one thing was clear to everyone reading. Keeping the peace is only virtuous when it doesn't require you to disappear. But how about you? If you had a verdict in this case, what would it be? Let me know. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, be sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you like to hear stories like this one, then you're going to absolutely love Audible. Try it out for free today. Just click on the link in the description.